Well, Amy Orr Ewing joins me now. She is an evangelist, author, and speaker, and senior vice president of our Zim. She has a book coming out later in the year, Where is God in All the Suffering? And I'm looking forward to having her on properly, maybe on Unbelievable at some point, to talk about that. But for now, she's joining me, like everyone is, from lockdown at her home. Welcome along, Amy.
Thank you. Hi, Justin. How are you?
I'm well. How are you doing, though? I know
Um,
you've got three boys. I'm sure you're
yeah.
going through all the same issues around how to keep them occupied and make sure they don't, have some kind of an education at this point and so on.
Yeah,
What's it
totally.
like?
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, I'm sure everyone's struggling with it. We're doing our best with online schooling. I think I've realised I'm the only introvert in a house of raging extroverts who are also sort of fanatical athletes and can't,
Wow.
go and compete in their chosen sport. So, feeling really grateful for a garden. I know
Yep.
that lots of people are doing this without outside space, and
Mm,
I mean, hats off to anyone coping with that. It's hard, isn't it? But
yeah.
also finding glimpses of grace in it. Time together as a family. We sort of swing between the
Yeah. I
moments
know.
and actually this is really good that we've got
Yeah.
all this time together. So yeah,
No.
lots of mixed emotions.
Lots and lots of sympathy for you for that. We have four children in our family, and we also have the benefit of a garden at least.
Yeah,
And I appreciate all those who don't.
yeah,
And that's a great blessing. But yeah, with the best in the world, there are moments of tension when people are trying to do what they need to do, but they're having to adapt to new
yeah.
routines and so on.
New world, isn't it?
We are living in unprecedented times. That's become an overused phrase in some ways, but this is a unique moment in world history, it seems to me. So, what are your thoughts on the big picture for how this might affect the church long term? What we're doing in the meantime? What this means for the world? I mean, those are huge questions, I know, but what are you seeing just from where you are at the moment, Amy?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, Justin. This is a moment that most of us didn't really expect to live through in our lives. I'm really aware of how this pandemic is affecting the poorest, and I work with a global team, including teams in Africa and the Middle East, and you're just hearing of the utterly kind of crushing and devastating impact of a pandemic like this there. And then also here, I think all of us, certainly in my church and just in the community where I live, people that I know, we all know people who've lost parents, who've lost loved ones, or have had loved ones in intensive care that may have pulled through, but you've really gone through that agony of potentially losing them and being distanced, not being able to be there at the bedside. So all of that, I think, just massively shapes the psychology, the economy, the world that we're operating in. And for us as Christians, I feel like there's a sort of wake up moment when the reality of death feels closer than it's ever felt before. I think that's a challenge to us as we're asking ourselves, what are we living for, and do we really believe in the resurrection of Jesus, and do we really believe in the hope of the gospel? And it's a sort of amazing opportunity in a way to talk about the deeper things of life and eternity and all of that. I think also in social justice terms, I'm really reminded of the context that the early church flourished in. Between AD 249 and 262, there was a huge pandemic. The Western sort of civilization was really taken out by. I mean, there's one source that says 5,000 people died in one day in Rome at the height of that pandemic.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
that's the context that the early church worked in. And Christian love and the sacrifice of believers of going to nurse unbelieving neighbours and dying of the pandemic themselves, that the sort of sheer love of the church actually turned the Roman world upside down. It kind of really contributed to the evangelization of Europe. So I feel like there's a sort of prophetic moment for us as the church to really love radically and to love like Jesus did. yeah, not to sort of earn favor with people, not that being the motivation, motivated by God's love, but knowing that we might see amazing breakthrough as we do that.
Yeah, I know that you've got a book coming up now. It's a little way off at this point, but funnily enough, it is a book on suffering. It's called Where is God in All the Suffering? I guess when you were writing, you had no idea of the context within which that book will eventually be released. But where do you begin with that particular book? Because very often this can be treated as, certainly in apologetic circles, as a sort of philosophical problem to be dealt with. But that's kind of not the way you want to try and treat it too much in the book, isn't it? I think you begin very much from a pastoral angle and saying the way that suffering affects most of us is emotionally primarily. So tell us where the book came from and what people can expect from it.
Sure. Thanks, Justin, and thanks for reading it as well. So
my pleasure. My pleasure.
It's not coming out till September, and I have actually been able to put some stuff about the pandemic in. The publisher was really kind about that, so I have been able to reflect a bit on that in it. So that, for me, that the question of suffering, is someone who's worked as an evangelist and in apologetics for over 20 years. It's obviously a question I've thought a lot about. And for me, I think it's hard to disentangle the logical question, how could there be a loving God and this be the lived experience of billions of people suffering, including something like this pandemic? And so that as a logical question, and that as a question that is a heartfelt and lived question. And I think sometimes the problem with apologetics has been to treat it primarily as a logical question. But sometimes the problem in the church is that we haven't even begun to address it as a logical question. So I'm trying to do both in the book, and hopefully it doesn't feel too sort of heavily philosophical, but I'm aiming that it would actually feel honest. But this is a real problem, that God is loving and that we experience the world in the way that we do. And so as I was thinking about how to approach it, I really wanted to approach it through the lens of love and the unique position in the Christian faith of love, that love is the defining characteristic of God, and that it just impacts how we see everything. So the reason that suffering feels so awful is because of love, because we question, am I really loved if I'm going through this? And because we love others who go through terrible things. That's why then those terrible things hurt. So really, I was trying to kind of approach the subject through that, not minimizing the power of the logical question and seeking to really try and address that honestly, but also, I guess, drawing on what is so wonderful and actually unique about what the Christian faith has to offer. Because let's just take, one small sort of seam of this. If we were to say, within a kind of secular worldview, if there's no God and life is just an accident of physics, chemistry, and biology, why do we feel as we do when blobs of atoms suffer? Why does it matter? And when you think about it like that, the answers that secularism offer us don't make anywhere near as much sense as what the Bible offers us. Suffering matters because human beings have been made in the image of God, and life is ultimately sacred, and love is a real category. That's why we hurt. So within the Christian worldview, we're given a kind of framework that actually makes sense of the human lived experience. But we're not just left there. We're also met by a God who enters the suffering world and suffers himself with us and for us. And that's just enormously powerful. Yeah. There's this promise of an experience of love and presence, even in the suffering. Yeah, so sorry, loads to say. It's really hard to do it in short form.
You're encapsulating so much there, really helpfully, actually. But I guess one of the things I've noticed in this current situation is I seem to see two different reactions to this. some people, maybe, you know, some of my more hardened atheist friends on Facebook and so on, saying, well, just goes to show there's no God, it's just nature taking its course, whatever. And others, interestingly, who, some quite surprising people, seem to be opening up. They seem to be saying, actually, I'm not sure my life makes much sense now, because suddenly all of the securities I had have been taken away. And so I think for some people suffering, kind of, they think, okay, I'm ruling God out now. For other people, it actually opens the door, interestingly, to thinking about what's important in life. And we see that kind of the silver linings, if there are any, as I see it in this crisis as we're experiencing here in the UK, is people are suddenly realizing what's important to them. And that actually, when you can't have all the things that you once had, actually relationships, love, kind of that group unity and solidarity of being in this together, suddenly those things, you know, become important. And my hope, I suppose, is that will point beyond itself as well, to the God who kind of undergirds all of that. So I don't know what your thoughts are on whether suffering ultimately pushes people away or brings them towards God.
Well, I think I agree with what you just said there, Justin, that it's both, and people react very differently to the same set of data and the same set of experiences, I guess. And I think that now is an opportunity to speak into both reactions. So I think the reaction that says, oh, this just proves there's no God, there is something to say to that. You know, John Lennox has got this book, Where is God in a Coronavirus World, that's just come out. And he really looks at that looks in that book specifically at the question of viruses, and sort of draws out the research from that female scientist at Pennsylvania State University who talks about how viruses are actually needed for the planet to flourish. It's less than 1% of viruses that are harmful, and so there's still explanation within Christian faith as to how there could be this virus. And at the same time, the gospel speaks to those who are searching, for whom this is a wake up to ask, is there more to life than this kind of hamster wheel of, you know, urgent acquisition that I've been living on, of competitive consumerism, or just so taken up with banal aspects of life, my job or whatever. And this is a moment to press stop on all of that and to ask, what is life really about? And into that question, again, I think the gospel uniquely speaks, because you know, we've just been celebrating Easter. There's this moment in history where God has actually come and evidenced himself and proven his claims to be God and to be the creator and to be the source of love, by rising from the dead and ultimately to have power over death. And that is just such a tremendous message of hope right now at this time. And then that same God offers to encounter us, to actually meet us with his presence. That's a testable claim as well, that he can pour his love into our hearts, even in the darkest moments. So I feel like it's a really wonderful time of opportunity and of reflecting on the deeper things of life.
Now, look, as I wind this interview up, I've been speaking to a number of Christian thinkers about these issues in the last few weeks, but none of them have as fascinating a picture in their background as you do, Amy. So I want to ask you, can you sort of tell us about this fascinating picture? And I have a feeling I've seen similar pictures like this before, but perhaps you could explain what this picture is behind you.
Sure. Yeah. So this is a picture by the artist Charlie Mackesy of the prodigal son being embraced by the father. And the writing says this is the story of the prodigal son, and, you know, kind of tells in very brief form that story from Luke's gospel. And you may be familiar with Charlie Mackesy from the pictures he's done that are all over the NHS, and that book, the Fox, the Mole and the Horse. Amazing artist, Christian artist. He actually led my husband to Christ my husband was 14. He was a teenager on a sort of Christian camp, and when Frog, my husband, got ordained, I got in touch with Charlie and asked if I could sort of commission a piece of artwork for him, and this is what he did. And he's done quite a few of these prodigal sons, and there's also a daughter one you can see, and it's just tremendously meaningful for us because it speaks of that God of love who embraces anyone who will come, however far off we may have been living miles away from him, his kingdom, his priorities, but that embrace of the Father, because of Jesus the Son, is possible that we can be that Son embraced by him. So yeah, that's what that picture is.
It's a beautiful picture. No, God bless you, Amy. Yeah, and what a great sort of message to have emblazoned in your sitting room or wherever you're sitting right now. God who welcomes us all.
Yeah.
I suppose we can only pray that many people will find their way, like the prodigal, back to God through this crisis. It's often through hardship, through difficulty. You know, the prodigal son story is of someone who wandered away and went through all kinds of difficulty, famine and so on, before realizing that there was a Father waiting for him. But bless you. Great to talk to you, Amy.
Thank you,
we will hopefully catch up once the book is published properly.
We'd love that. Thank you.
And all the best for you and your family, Azim, and all the work you're still doing.
And for you, Justin, and everyone at Premier Radio and everyone listening, thank you.